Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sport Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm really excited to welcome back skill acquisition coach Dr. Ed Coughlan. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be back. It's lovely. I think I was guest number one, and it's really nice to be back. I without kind of being too blushy. Your podcast is kind of one of my go-tos, so it's really nice to come back on, and maybe we might even talk about some of the guests you've had or whatever if it comes up. But I really like what you do, and I really like how you do it, and it's great. So keep up the great work, because it's proven to be a super resource for even someone like me in the sports psych space academically with students and stuff. So thanks.
Well, thank you, mate. Really kind words. I really appreciate that, especially coming from yourself. And there was a reason why you were on episode number one, because I wanted to start at the very top. And hopefully I've stayed there. I've had some amazing guests, but I'm actually going to stick my neck out. I haven't looked at the data recently, but I actually think it is the most downloaded episode.
Well, let's top that today.
Well, yeah, I don't know whether that's because you are so awesome, mate, or just because it's episode number one and that's where people tend to start, and then it drops off. But no, I'm only joking. Well, look, why don't we start where we always start? And on this occasion, it is a reintroduction, and I know so many people will know of you and your work, but let's enlighten those who don't know you so well. So tell us about Dr. Ed Coughlan.
So yes, hi everyone. I'm a senior lecturer in skill acquisition and psychology and sports psychology and kind of performance in Munster Technological University, which is in Cork, in Ireland, and I'm also research lead for the team skill acquisition team, which is a significant part of my job here. Outside of my academic duty, I'm a coach. And as Dan said, skill acquisition would be the domain that I really like and enjoy engaging in. I engage with athletes right now from a performance perspective, largely in the pro golf space. But I also coach as a volunteer coach dad with my boys in their respective sports. And the other side of the work I do in coaching is almost like a coach audit kind of stuff. I engage with national governing bodies, or I'll engage with other coaches, and we'll just have some good conversations about their practices and how can we share some ideas to improve what's going on for them.
And you were sharing with me before we started recording that is this your 30th year in coaching?
Yeah, it is. It is. I started young, 18. I'm 48 now. I started young, and I wasn't looking to coach, but kind of typical back then. You know, we're back in the 20th century when this was all happening. But I was kind of I did okay at something, and the coach was like, oh, can you kind of jump in here for me? And then all of a sudden, before I knew it, I was taking things, and I obviously liked it because I didn't run away from it, let's say. But I think in the 30 years, I think I can break it up into three distinct kind of decades. You know, that first decade, Dan, I coached the way I was coached, and it was hugely organized. And if you walked into my house, there's parts where you say, oh, that's definitely Ed's corner, because it's just organized and it's sorted and everything has its place. So that was the way my coaching was for those first kind of 10 years or so. The next 10 years, I began to question a lot of things, what I was doing. And it became other things. I went off and did other things as well in different spaces, but I began to question a lot, and I got very frustrated. I got lost, but I wasn't comfortable in that place of being frustrated and lost at all. And I was quite deterred at times. And then as coming out of that decade and into this decade, I get lost a lot nowadays, but I really like it. So I think that's the only difference. I'm comfortable now when I don't know what's going on, and I'm more comfortable kind of being landed with some problems to help others solve, or even for myself to solve with athletes that I work with and stuff. So that's kind of the way the 30 years has gone. But yeah, it's been. It doesn't feel like it.
I share that pain, I have to say. What does getting lost look like? What do you actually mean by that? I mean, do you specifically mean that you just don't know what to say or to do, or it's just that there's problem after problem being thrown at you and you're confronted with, and you've got to flex and solve those problems on the spot?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I think one thing, let's say before we got on a call today, I was chatting with two guys who I lean on a lot, and I love our chats. Would be Pete Arnott and Stu Morgan, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that Pete said today was just about you look back in a few years from when you did something, you think, oh, I wouldn't do that now, and oof, I misinterpreted what that meant. And whereas previously, I think in that middle 10 years, when I'd find something that perturbed what I was doing, it freaked me out. My ego got massively up in its high haunches, and I was like, oh no, I don't like this because it's telling me what I'm doing isn't right, and I would push back against it because I wanted to protect what I was doing and I wanted to defend what I was doing. And now when I get lost, it's like, oh wow, I can't wait to see where this is going to take me, because something's come up and I'm not too sure how to handle this. Or and again, with 30 years of coaching experience, that's rare. But so what the other side of that is, something comes up and I'm thinking, okay, I've seen this before, but I want to try and see, can I deal with it or handle it or come around it in a different way? How have I dealt with it previously? Let's not just do a reheat and stick it in the microwave and just go again. No, let's actually go back and see if we come at it from the same angle with a different lens, do we find a different solution? If we come at it from a different angle altogether with the same lens, do we find a different solution? And so on and so on. So I'm in a place where I'm really I get a real buzz when things get thrown at me where I'm like, I don't know what to do here.
I'd like to spend the day talking team sports and individual sports, skill acquisition, coaching. I'm sure we'll drift all over the place. Interestingly, you spoke about two people there that you said you lean on a lot: Stuart Morgan, Peter Arnott. They are not very much in the golf space. They are golf professionals. They are golf coaches, and that's a space that you've started to enter the last couple of years more and more, working with professionals, leading amateurs around building effective practice plans, learning how to acquire skill perhaps more effectively and efficiently as compared to what they've done historically. How's that going, mate? Because I know I would be right in thinking, wouldn't I, that your coaching historically has been more from a team perspective, and you ventured into this individual sport. So talk to me a little bit about some of your experiences in the last year or so, a couple of years since we last spoke.
Yeah. So I suppose that's an interesting point. And again, like anything else, people get, they have their interpretation of where you are. In fact, it's probably the other way around. Most of my coaching before, not most, I would say 50-50 of my coaching before I went into the golf space, which is now nearly 5 years ago, was team sport or individual sports, because I did quite a bit of work in the track and field domain. With individual athletes, and especially in the kind of middle distance, long distance space, but also in some of the field events. But then, yes, in the team space, then quite a bit, maybe 60-40, 60% in the field event space. So the golf for me has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because there's so much information on golf out there nowadays, compared to the golf that I would have played as a young fella and the golf I think I'm still playing today. There's so much information, and I think it's at risk of becoming information overloaded. And I think oftentimes what I find myself doing is just helping players, and as you say, these are professional athletes who their livelihoods are at stake here. Oftentimes what I might find my job is to try and strip away things, to be like, let's get back. Why did you get into this in the first place? Oh, I used to practice like this. So why don't you practice like this anymore? How has it become so ingrained into a specific segment of a part of a swing type of thing that you found yourself in, and so on and so forth. So I think that's been a fascinating thing, because as you rightly said, my space here really is like I'm really, I work really hard to try and stay in my lane. There's for years I was in the strength and conditioning domain, and I loved it there. But now when I'm in the golf, working with golfers, I could do that because it was something I did for a long time. But I'm really strong saying, look, I don't do that anymore. Let's get someone in who'll do that, so that I'm able to say, this is my lane. I'm going to work here, and that lane, if you're wondering, is the practice space. The environment around it. Not working with them essentially on technical stuff, because again, there are people who that's their lane. Their lane is being able to spot things that I wouldn't even know where to look. Let's say. So within that, in that lane around where practice is, I've found it fascinating. I think there are still a lot of things that golf can explore and look into in a bit more detail to try and really maximize the return for what players get out of the time they put in. As you know yourself, as a golfer yourself, pros can find themselves in a rabbit hole very quickly, and they can find themselves without any real intention be on a range for 6 hours working on something and then that 6 hours turns into 3 days, and that 3 days turns into, well, the last month I've been working on this. And and that's one thing I've been so impressed with, like their golfers' capacity to just endure, and stay on something is amazing. But what I try and do is say, well, jeepers, let's take that incredible quality that you're bringing to this and just redirect it into something where you may get more bang for your buck. You also may actually feel that it might positively impact on your even on your well-being. Not my lane, but what you currently, when I ask you about your practice, you talk about it in such negative ways, such depressing ways, it's about the hurt, the torture. I'm wrecked from it. I'm exhausted. I'm going, it's all very heavy, and I'm saying, let's see if we can practice in another way that might actually give you a bit more bang for your buck for the time you're putting in, but might also elevate the process into something that's a bit more boosting and a bit more fulfilling, let's say.
Well, let's explore that in a little bit more depth, and I'm keen to at some point today compare and contrast this to team sports and session design. But when you're a golfer, you're very much ascribing your own practice towards yourself by and large. But there is always the facility to bring on board somebody like yourself to help you create a better practice plan. Now, I certainly recognise some of the things that you're speaking about there, having been a pro golfer. I mean, I always say I was a worse golfer at the age of 23 than I was 17, having spent hours and hours and hours, thousands of hours on the practice ground most days. I just got worse from the practice that I did. I worked really, really hard, but clearly I worked quite poorly at striving to develop myself as a golfer. So what are the kind of, you're essentially alluding to golfers potentially over practice, and they need to strip things back. So, you can't name names or give specific details around names, but what are the kind of practice plans that you're helping golfers develop?
Great question. I think, people will say to you, what are your tips? How, I'm working with an individual sport here. What are the things that you want to try and, guide someone towards,
Yeah.
And especially in golf, there's a few things that I would say to people. And one, and this is actually based on some work I've been doing recently with UK coaching. One, I would be encouraging people towards a better understanding of what deliberate practice is. Okay.
Yeah.
There's loads of types of practice. We've got your naive practice, your maintenance practice, your play practice, your competition practice, your purposeful practice. We've all, but there's nothing that gives quite the performance return that deliberate practice does. So I'll work with someone and say, okay, Paul Ford and myself, we've developed the Aspire model. Okay, within that, we'll say, okay, it's really important. that you go through that ASPIRE. You analyze your game, you select something that you need to work on, you practice that in a way that actually is representative of the environment that you'll be competing in it. You engage in feedback with the task, but also your coach, and then you repeat it. And this is probably the most important part. You repeat that task, but you're not trying to repeat the outcome. You're not trying to repeat the action that leads to the outcome. You're just trying to repeat the process. And you're trying to do it in a variety of different ways. And then you evaluate has it worked, and then you maybe go back to the start again. Oftentimes when I ask golfers, what are you doing? When they tell me what they're doing, it does not fit the model of the most effective form of practice that we have out here. It's not deliberate practice in any way. And deliberate practice isn't something you can do for hours on end either. So then that speaks to, you're out here doing what for 8 hours? I hope you're aware that the likelihood of a large chunk of that translating and transferring is quite low, because our capacity is just not. We're human. We're not robotic. We don't have an endless, memory drive and just put in more RAM so I could download more stuff. We don't work like that. We need rest. We need recovery. We need to be able to consolidate our tasks. And so I think that would be one of the first things I would try to engage with them about what really good practice looks like. Okay. And make them aware of all the different types of practices they do, Or what are you doing today? Today I'm off for a few days. I'm going to go and play with a couple of friends. I'm back home, so I'm going to play with some friends. And I'll be like, great. So don't take it seriously today. Don't get annoyed if you hit a shot on the third with your forehand and it doesn't go on the green, because you're not in that environment to be working on it. You might have just been having a great laugh with your mates about something that happened, So to help them segment even their headspace for when they're working on different things, I'm out here in a social capacity, so don't get annoyed with your golf. We're not going to talk at the end of this round of golf to see how it went, because you're out here from a social perspective. But on a day that we've got a task and I'm saying we're going to work today, then we will talk about it, because we're going to do a temperature check on, was it effective? Where did it work? Did it not work and stuff? And I think that helps them then to build their awareness, thinking, okay, I'm actually in that really hot space now where deliberate practice lives. And here it isn't. I'm actually doing some maintenance work here, which is not deliberate practice, or I'm actually doing some exploration stuff here, which is not deliberate practice, and so on and so forth. So that would be the first thing. I'll be trying to encourage them to get a better understanding of all the different types of practice, and then try to take them through the Aspire model. The other thing then I would be doing, which I have found challenging enough at times, is to really get them to embrace exploration and go back to that. To go back to, like, for example, if I go out and watch my two boys in the green outside our home with their other friends, Dan, it's incredible practice. It's all play, for example, but the rules that they put on it so that it's equal between the group, because sometimes you could go out there and there could be a 7-year gap between the eldest and the youngest, yet the games still work. They'll adjust the games so that everyone's able to take part. And there's no parents out there. There's no adults, and yet there's laughter and everything. And is it competitive? Of course, because they seem to be inherently competitive, but it works. They're massively engaged and they'll play for hours at this. And then you'll go out an hour later and it's the same game, but you know what? They've changed the rules. They've adapted it in some way. They've changed, or it's a totally different game. How are they able to do that and have it and get so much from it? And yet then when we think we have to coach them, we take them away from the one thing that they're very good at doing already themselves. So that would be another thing I'd be saying: embrace exploration. Try not to go in there with a definitive, this is what I have to find here, and be like, I'm looking forward to seeing what I find here, because I'm going to play around with some ideas around shots and stuff. And then the last thing I suppose would be to turn on your rabbit hole radar, as I say to them, because golfers, especially at the top end of the game, as you know, they can go down rabbit holes very quickly. And for example, they played a round of golf and they'd come in, I need to go to the range. Why? Oh, I hit a 7-iron there on the 8th. And you're like, what? And my 7-iron today just wasn't working. Well, how many 7-irons did you hit? 3. And two went left and one went right. So I got to go and figure that out. And you're like, whoa, slow down, But But normally, and not in, it wouldn't be a surprise for some people to go straight to the range after a round and try and fix something now and just go after something because it happened out in the environment of the golf course, in the competitive environment. And you're like, well, hang on, you had a late tee time today. You're just off the course before we're losing light, but now you're going to go to the range for an hour or so, and yet you're on an early tee time tomorrow because because it's Friday. Let, maybe, were there any other shots? No, but that 7-iron was that's telling me something's not right. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. Let's turn on the radar here for the rabbit hole radar to see, is this necessary right now? You have too small a sample to say that this is an issue, let's say, So they'd be the kind of things that around a session like that for an individual that I'd be, because you're so right, because so much of what the golfers do, they're on their own, and it's just some of those little guidelines to help them.
So what I've heard you say there, the things I've written down, you started by talking about deliberate practice, and it would be remiss of me not to mention that you've got an outstanding chapter in the book edited by Jenny Coe and Dr. Amy Whitehead, that they've been on the Sport Psych Show at the end of 2021 talking about their book. So that's an excellent chapter in there where you expand on deliberate practice, give a bit of a historical context, and talk about your Aspire model in there. But what I heard you say, I picked out a word, representative, and how potentially important that is. That yes, we might want to repeat our skills in order to hone our skills, if that's the right term to use, but we might want to do that within a representative environment.
Yeah.
So beating ball after ball after ball in one sort of single repetitive landscape, well, that's not what happens on the golf course. And so subsequently, deliberate practice has to incorporate what the course looks like, the demands of the course. The second thing I heard there was really interesting, actually, mental segmentation. I wrote down there that if you're going to go off and play with your mates, then enjoy playing with your mates and don't take it too seriously. It made me think that would be the time when I'd go and shoot 6 or 7 or 8 under par when I was having a laugh, and I should have mentally segmented that kind of attitude when I was actually competing. The third thing I wrote down, which I completely agree is important, is exploration. And it made me think of the incredible American coach who passed away some years ago now, back in the 90s, Harvey Pennick, who was Ben Crenshaw's coach, a whole bunch of players around that era and before, and how he used to get them. I think Dr. Bob Rotella has a few stories about the work that Harvey Pennick did with his with Tom Kite, Ben Crenshaw, wonderful yesteryear golfers, some of the best in the world, and the exploration they got into. And then don't go down the rabbit hole in as much as I have this problem. I'm really going to focus on this problem, which can make the problem even worse. I suppose my question with relation to all of that is, you're out there, you're working with really good players. And one thing actually to say as an aside, and it would be interesting to get your comment on this, it strikes me that all of those principles can be utilized across sports. So there's a kind of a statement stroke question for you there. And I'd also be interested to find out, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of pushback do you get? Because I know, again, we are so socialized into a certain way of practice within golf, but also in every sport. This is how we do this. What pushback do you get? And how much, if you get pushback, how do you work with that? Do you actually shift a bit yourself and go with the golfer there? So a few questions for you there.
Yeah, really good, really good. So just firstly on that book chapter, it was a real privilege to actually ask to write that, because the book, The Myths of Sports Coaching, is lovely because it gave me an opportunity to address some of the myths about deliberate practice, Dan. And there are some phenomenal myths about deliberate practice. And
feel free to engage.
Well, for example, the biggest one was from Malcolm Gladwell's misinterpretation of Anders Ericsson's work to say it was the 10,000 hour rule, A brilliant writer that Gladwell is, brilliant, and I love his work. But and to his credit, he has come back out and openly and publicly apologized.
Yeah.
But it takes a bit of while for people to come back around and be like, "Oh, he apologized. Oh, sugar, I've just created an entire framework based on 10,000 hours of practice." Let's say,
And sorry to interject, but I say a lot. I'm imagining quite a few governing bodies actually utilised that notion of 10,000 hours in their frameworks.
Oh, no doubt.
So it can do it. It can have a lot of it can do a lot of damage.
No doubt. And that's why. And again, you can see why, because he's a brilliant writer and he has an incredible way of drawing you in.
Of course.
And again, there's no issue here because he put his hand up and said, "Mea culpa. Sorry, I was trying to say, but." Don't get me wrong. What was the positive? It brought it into the public domain, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
My entire PhD was built around deliberate practice. So I remember at the time I was like, "Wow, this is incredible! It's on the radio." The discussion is on the radio and stuff. But it just gave us an opportunity to address that. The 10,000 hours and the different types of practice. But one of the things about deliberate practice that I like a lot is even the people who. Because again, it's not a silver bullet. We need to be really clear on that. And that's something I say. It's not the only answer. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the only type of practice you should do, and so on and so forth. And Anders himself would have mentioned that in his 2020 paper. But even those, let's say the detractors, when they did a meta-analysis on all of the different work on deliberate practice, they came back and said, well, look, it only accounts for 24% of the variance in expertise. And you're like, what? That much? That's an incredible for people who are trying to say it's not everything. Yeah. It's only accounts for 24% of, and you're like, oh my word, that's some way of promoting the one thing that you're trying to dampen. That is enormous. That there's that level of, and that's what led Paul and I to put together a system, like a framework for the Aspire model. To essentially that the other book chapter that's in is in Mark and Nikki Hodges' book, the third edition of Skill Acquisition in Sport, and it was basically to operationalize deliberate practice. How can and in that chapter you'll see we've examples for how team sports can operationalize it and individual sports and the like. Let's say and how can you use the Aspire model to just supercharge your practice, essentially. The other thing from that, it reminded me of another very good book, The Constraints-Led Approach to Golf Coaching, because in there, Peter Arnott speaks about consistency in golf and the myth of consistency in golf. In I think it's in chapter 2 or 3, and it's brilliant because again they use the evidence that golfers are shown and told, oh, this is why you need to do this, and they use that evidence against the myth. They're saying, hang on, even the best players in the world have a significant spread in their scoring averages. So when you're a 12 handicapper and you're having a spread, oh, today I shot 7 over, and the next day I shot 18 over. That's okay. That's kind of normal because you know what? Justin Thomas and DJ and John Ram, they'll shoot 6 under and they'll shoot, 1 over. There's a 7-shot spread for the best players in the world, And again, as you'd be aware, like how rare is it that a guy goes out and shoots the best round of his life and then the next day comes back and maybe shoots level par 1 under, and yet the previous day on the same course in maybe similar conditions shoots 8 under, 9 under and the like. It's a rare occasion that we have that symmetry.
Well, and just please excuse me interjecting while you're in full flow, but what you've just said, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but when I was involved with England Golf, exactly what you said there, when I was lead site for England Golf, it's one of the reasons why I brought in almost like a framework it was a framework of a categorization of your golf, in as much as I've got an A game, a B game, a C game, a D game. Okay, very conceptual, right? But A, B, C, D. My argument is golfers have to understand that even the best players in the world, by and large, average their B- game out there on tour. If they've got 80, 100 rounds of golf, they are going to average their B- game. They've got to start to fall in love or find a way to fall in love with their C game. Because if you can fall in love with your C game, where you're not hitting the middle of the bat, where you're certainly not hitting the middle of the fairway, where you're not peppering the pin, then actually you can optimize your ability to shoot the best possible score in your C game. And when you're on tour, if you can make that under par, then you are going to keep your tour card. Then you're going to make some money. So yeah, sorry, that's an aside.
And if I may, Dan, I think that also translates into team sports.
Okay.
I like that sense of, on a day that I had the best game of, you know what I mean, the best game of my life, and I was playing in the centre back position or something, and I had the most tackles, and I had the most passes out from defence, and I had the most. And for you to realize, okay, the next day it may not fall that way for me, but that doesn't mean that it is a calamitous performance. That I'm actually able to go to some really robust elements and say, okay, let's just do something very simple. Like, for example, the Richie McCaw was a brilliant exponent of this. He would say, if I'm in a game and I really feel I'm struggling to get a handle on the game, either the pace of it or just that I seem to be a little bit off. And these are these unexplainable things that athletes, some days they wake up and they're like, I just don't feel it today. Why? I've gone through the same process and so on and so forth, but I just seem to be out of it. He'll say, and he used to talk about it, he said, just do something really simple the next time the ball comes to you. So rather than trying to force it, I'm going to try and get into the game and really, and then all of a sudden maybe foul the ball when he goes into a ruck or a maul or something because he's trying to force it. He's like, just do something really simple the next time I get the ball. And what would he often do? He said, I'd either gather the ball, go to ground to set up a new ruck, or pass it to the nearest guy. Not a spectacular pass. And I remember saying, there are days when I'll feel like the spectacular pass is on, but on those days that doesn't feel like it's on, just do something simple to get you in the game.
You kind of get a hit of dopamine when you've done that. It's like getting to the bottom of your inbox, your email inbox. You get a hit of dopamine. If you just play that little pass, and the pass is completed, and it's like, oh great, okay, that feels good. But it's interesting, Ed. You've drawn out of me sort of within my consultancy practice. I talked about golf there in terms of become acquainted, accustomed, and start to enjoy your C game. In team sports, I use more of a scale of 1 to 10, and I actually think there's almost like a secret sauce to give myself the best chance to have, say, like a 6 out of 10 game, a 7 out of 10 game at best on my average days. I do have to consider, okay, I might go out there and I might be at 5 out of 10. I might be making mistakes. I might not feel great. I might feel lethargic and flat. That's okay. What have I got to do to deal with that? It's having that.
And actually, just on that, if I may, Dan, I've seen the work that you do, and the work that you do around the game face and so on. For me, the essence of that work that you do with athletes and with teams is that if we can get them engaged in that process of a game face, then we are just maximizing the likelihood of them having, at worst, a 5 out of 10. It's not down to chance that we're saying, okay, we're still going to go through this process, guys. We're still going to try and get you to there. And then on the day that the other things don't fall for you, you're still going to be able to engage and compete and have an impact on this game. On the days that it does fall a bit more, it becomes a 7-8. On the days that it's just this wondrous opportunity, it becomes a 9 out of 10. Like 9 and a 10 out of 10. Like, for example, when Ashley Cole marked Cristiano Ronaldo in the European Championships. What a game. And it's only that someone showed me some footage of that earlier today. It was like one of the all-time greatest performances by a back on one of the all-time greatest forwards in the history of the game. Does he do that? Did he do that in every game for England and Chelsea? No. But because of his preparation, whatever that might have been, he enabled himself to at least get there if it was on, let's say, which meant that there was probably very few days, if ever a day, that he had a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10 and an absolute stinker,
It's interesting. It sort of borderlines, we all start with, and I'm very not guilty, but I very much push the notion of doing the things that are going to help you to win. So striving to win rather than not striving to not lose, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas actually there can be a point during a game where you've possibly got to have an uncomfortable moment where you've got to negotiate with yourself and start sort of saying, well, today's not my best game, and there is a danger of having a poor performance here. There is a danger of losing. Right. Okay. What have I got to do to not lose?
Yes.
Essentially, and that can open up a whole bunch of different behaviours. Listen, I don't want to sabotage this by going too deep down that road. I do want to come back to, because I'm really curious to hear your answer here, because I know what that golfing landscape is like, mate, and I'm pretty sure you may have had some uncomfortable conversations,
Yes.
just both for
Pushback.
yourself and for your clients. Pushback. How much do you have to flex? Where do you go with that?
It's very interesting you say that. I had a session with a player last week, and we were on the course. We played 9 holes, and at the end of the 9 holes, he turned to me, and I said, "So, do we want to go on?" He said, "I'm done." He said, "I'm." He said, He said, "I'm done. I need to be able to consolidate that." Now they weren't. He didn't say consolidate, because I actually went into discussion about the importance of task consolidation. He said, "I'm done." He said, "I need to go away. I need to just," he said, I really think we landed on something out there. But he said, "I'm exhausted. We just played 9 holes." And I was like, "Great. I'll say so go away and reflect," and so on, so on and so forth. But while we were out there, we were talking about something, and he was asking me, because this is a relatively new partnership between us and a relationship, and he was saying, "How did this?" When I said, "Look, the one thing for sure that I can almost guarantee you, I'm never going to get you to do something you don't want to do." I said, "It may not go the way you wanted it to go, but there will always be a discussion of, well, do you want to go down this route? And this is what it might look like down here. I don't know for sure. I don't have many answers here, because I can't predict the future. But do you want me to challenge you in this way or that way? Or how would that sound?" And that's where they said, "No, okay, let's have a look here." That's where the pushback then comes, because then I'll engage in behaviors, create an environment with certain tasks that will hopefully get the behaviors that I feel and that we've spoken about, that will hopefully get them to come to the surface. And we're like, "Okay, there you go. Why do you respond like that when you hit that shot? Or why is that your reaction when you miss a 6-footer for par, but you don't have that same reaction when you miss a 6-footer for birdie? What's going on here?" And so on and so forth, let's say. And so with that in mind, I will always, now they may not like then where we go, but it will always have come from them in the first place. We will always have had that discussion. That's where the pushback comes. "Oh, what do you mean by this?" And I said, "Well, this is what I meant. When I told you we're going to start exploring this, I told you it's going to be uncomfortable. The behaviors you've talked about." And as you know, Dan, the 2000th in the world rankings golfer is a serious ball striker,
Yes.
But it's incredible, isn't it? Like you go and you see these guys in the range, and you're like, "Oh my word!" And you don't know. And these are people that nobody knows apart from their parents and their partner. Like these are unknown people with just incredible ball striking skills. And then you go and you maybe follow their name for the day on the course, and you're like, and they're 6 shots off the cut point on day one, let's say, and where you think the cut's going to be, and and you're like, "What? How?" That person was incredible ball striking. Or you might play a practice round with somebody, and you're like, "Wow!" And you check them out later on, and it's like they haven't made a cut in this many rounds, and you're like, "Wow, this many tournaments," So the ability out there is off the charts. It's the management of that ability when it gets into kind of these interesting hot spaces, let's say, under competition and when they're under the gun. That's where I get the most pushback. When unwanted behaviors come to the surface and emerge in tasks, I get a lot of pushback. And that's where I have to take a beat. I've got to take a beat, because if I push too hard, it'll probably push them away. Unless, of course, you find somebody who's thinking, actually, they respond quite well to, they really like being in the weeds here. You know what I mean? And then even with that type of a person, I have to be careful that we don't stay in the weeds all the time then, because then this might be a person who just likes always trying to have to figure something out. And you're like, "Actually, I think we're okay. There's nothing to figure out here. Just relax and go and play, So I do, you said there, how much do I flex? I'd like to think I flex enough to get the ball rolling. When I'm given the go ahead, though, I will then try and create a challenging environment in them, especially for the kind of caliber of player that we're talking about. If we were dealing with a more developmental player, let's say, and earlier in the career, I'd flex a lot more. But as you are aware, in pro sport, time is of the essence. You want to try and of course you'd love to see a response yesterday. Now it might be in a month's time, but if you could do it in instead of 30 days, 29 days, you'll take that. If you could do it in 7 days instead of 8 days, you'll take that. So there is always that urgency. So that's where I'll flex. I'll flex as much as I feel I need to, without slowing down the process too much because I've gone too far towards where they are, and all of a sudden it's just two of us doing the same thing. I do feel I need to be a counterpoint at times.
It's interesting because it can be so uncomfortable for a golfer, and again, I do want to move over to the team sports side of things, but having been there myself, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about you turning up on my doorstep, and I'm accustomed to 8 hours of practice a day, which you can do in golf physiologically, and I think the vast majority of golfers do actually do that kind of practice, and then someone comes along and talks about the kind of things that you would talk about, and you start to introduce the notion of 4 hours practice a day, or something along those lines, halving it. And I'll use this word guilt, that it could be easy for a player to start to feel guilty about, well, I feel guilty because I'm not working hard enough, and I've got sponsors, and my parents have helped me and support me, and I should do another couple of hours. And it's almost synonymous with, I don't know, if I was to compare and contrast to coaching, it's almost like saying to a coach who is particularly controlling with his or her coach feedback, to engage in autonomy supportive coaching, and how uncomfortable that would feel to them. It's that real feeling of uncomfortable. When you feel uncomfortable, you're just uncertain. You don't know if you're getting it right.
You've hit on something that's very live for me right now. I've been encouraging some of the players to take time off. We're coming up to Christmas now. I know this is probably going out in 2022, but we're talking now just before Christmas. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are, take time off. I got an absolutely brilliant text from one of the players the other day, and it was, hadn't seen the clubs for 6 days, which was a big deal for this person, right? Not a big deal in a general sense. And I went out to play there, and the game was still there. I know you know this, but it was nice for me to see it.
Yes.
So that's come on the back of some conversations and some tasks where I was like, hang on, this some conversations where I'm saying, as soon as you think you have something that's really dear to you, people tend to hold on too tight to it. I said, the only time I can relate to this is that, let's say, if you found some really delicate jewel or delicate piece of an antique, and you're like, oh my God, I found it, like an Indiana Jones moment, Indiana Jones is going to make sure that I have it, and I'm going to hold it securely, but I'm not going to hold it too tight, because if I hold it too tight, I'm going to break it, and it's going to be worthless. In golf and in sport in general, we need to get used to the feeling of, you never had it in the first place. So can we just relax on, I'm after finding something, I want to hold on to it now too tight, because you know what happens? We even know kinematically and biomechanically, our movement changes when we think we have something. We get a little bit tighter. The degrees of freedom get reduced. They don't get more relaxed. We don't exploit more degrees of freedom. We actually turn around using less degrees of freedom, so the movement changes. So one of the things I've been working on with a couple of players in particular at the moment is getting them comfortable with the idea of when they come off the course, I really found something today. And I was like, no, you didn't. Relax. Okay? There were so many other things that contributed to that really good round of golf. That's what's there. That's the work that you've been putting in, and the process around the work you've been putting in. And I'll give you a specific example on this. One of the guys I work with, he was away doing some work in his, little bit of, had some off season, then came back to start just winding, getting a couple of weeks work done before then taking a few weeks off for Christmas. And he went out and he shot 8 under par, and he was like, wow, that was great. It felt really good and so on. And then in that afternoon was heard that some people wanted to play with him the next day, potential sponsors. And he was like, oh no, I've just shot 8 under, and now tomorrow is a big deal, and so on. And what did he do the next day? He shot 800 again the next day with the sponsors and so on. And the beauty of that moment for him was this, it's, he let go. The discussion, the thoughts that he was having before that round was, I didn't have it yesterday anyway, so relax. I'm just going to let go, and I'm going to go through the same process of exploration and being free with a lot of acceptance before I hit the shot. I accept where this might go before I even hit it, so I can just be relaxed and loose over the shot. And he shoots another 800 the next day with sponsors, and he's like, that was cool. Never done that before. But it wasn't anything technical in one sense. It was actually a psychological release. It was letting go of these myths. Again, going back to myths that you can't do it 2 days in a row. And I was like, well, 2 different courses and 2 different this and 2 different. I'm encouraging people all the time. When you think you have something, hold on gently so that it might actually evolve into something even better, rather than holding on tight to think that you have something that can't be changed. And I think with that, I'll go to a favorite quote of mine from Rick Shuttleworth, who you know as well. Learning movement skills is not a process of repeating a solution. It is repeating the process of finding a solution. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So that a golfer can go out and have a great round of golf one day and not feel that round of golf, oh God, that's gone for me now. I've spent that money, so I can't get it back. As opposed to, no, go through the same process and be open to potentially being there also today, but also being okay that if it's not to the same extent, and just, again, lightening the load for people seems to be what I'm doing a lot lately within that area.
Yeah, and a lot of those golfers feel quite heavy out there, and it's quite a claustrophobic environment. Listen, let's shift gears slightly. Shifting over to team sports, you mentioned earlier that deliberate practice with team sports, that they can go hand in hand, and I do believe there's been sort of debate over the years as to whether it's applicable for team sports.
Yeah.
If I may ask, tell me a little bit about that. How do those go hand in hand?
Yeah, brilliant. And again, I have to say, great question, because I know when I'm speaking to somebody like you, I know you know all the work. I know you read, and I know you're a real student of it all. So I know where you're coming from exactly there with that question. And it's a great question, because so often people will only hear a nugget about something and then misinterpret, and then all of a sudden it blows up into something else. So is it possible to do deliberate practice with a team? I'm going to give you a kind of a provocative answer here and say, no, it's not.
Okay.
So how do we engage with deliberate practice with the team? So, for example, what the definition of deliberate practice is that it is effortful, it's not inherently enjoyable, it's not immediately rewarding, it requires feedback, it requires that it's relevant to overall performance improvement, which is the big thing from a team sport perspective, right? So if I'm trying to work on let's say in football, soccer, okay? I'm working in a football environment, and I'm saying, and the coach is talking to me. He's like, Ed, we're trying to work on working it out from the back, or what we're like in the final third, when we might have a situation where it's a 3v4, and we don't seem to get enough shots off in this environment. I was like, okay, why? Oh, well, this player, if it gets to this player, it seems to break down a little more often than not, but he's a great player in other areas of the game. Great. So this is an ideal situation where there's a particular, we could run this scenario many times in training, but there'll be some players in that scenario who this is not deliberate practice for, because they actually get it. They're completely comfortable with this as a scenario and actually have fantastic stats about this scenario. But that's where the 2 ways that I work with deliberate practice in team environments is that I will identify for an individual a particular aspect of play that is, again, relevant to overall performance improvement, and I will engage that person as almost spotlight is on this person now. You might see it on Sky Sports or wherever you're listening from, in NBC or CBS or whatever, that there's a spotlight on this player, and when they're moving, we can see it when they do the analysis. And that's where that's where that kind of spotlight deliberate practice happens. I'm going to set up a scenario here for this individual, for this person to engage in deliberate practice. And there may be maybe one other person who it's really pertinent for, but for everyone else, this is maintenance practice right now. But that doesn't mean we can't engage with deliberate practice as a team for this individual because of how it may potentially have an overall performance improvement for the team. That's the first aspect. The second aspect then, of course, is in discrete skills within a team sport. There's a person who, let's say, and again, it still fascinates me. Professional footballers who still aren't exceptional off both sides. You know, your job is to play football. You have one game a week most weeks. You'll have 2 games a week if it's Champions League or there's a cup match and so on and so forth. But other than that, your job is to work on your skills. And this is where, again, some good performance analysis, and again, the Aspire model will say, well, what aspects of your performance are you weak at? Well, I tend to get caught because I only have my right foot to be able to either trap or deliver the ball from it with a pass, take a pass in or give a pass out. How can I? And this is where then I will engage with body-like deliberate practice. So I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to do some trade-off here, and this is stuff I've done in the past with some coaches in their team sports, and especially in football, is saying, okay, you tell me, and this actually came out of our own research, in fact, with Mark Williams and myself and Paul Ford. We'll work with the coaches and say to them, okay, coaches, do you know your players? Yes, I know all my players. Okay, so do you know the strengths and weaknesses of your players? Oh, I know all the strengths and weaknesses. Okay, great. So we need to obviously keep working on their strengths, but we also need to address their weaknesses. Now, we identify. So here's John. John's weakness is the following. Right. Now let's go to John and ask John. Because if John has a different idea of what his weakness is, we're already at loggerheads here. So, John, what do you think? And all of a sudden, not by leading him, but actually genuinely asking him, John, if we can go through a performance profile with you here. And if it comes out that John's got the same weakness, bingo, we're in a really hot space now. Because then we can start saying, okay, so John, this is a particular task that you're not great at. You're not great at receiving the ball on your left side. So we want to work on that. I'm then going to say, I'm going to set up some body deliberate practice. I'm going to say, John, Brian in the corner here is brilliant at receiving the ball with his left side. You're going to buddy up with him. We're going to do some intense deliberate practice with you in scenarios with a lot of variability where you're going to be modeling off a guy who's already very good, but you're also going to be trying to engage with this in a deliberate practice way. It's going to be effortful physically and cognitively. It's not going to be immediately rewarding. It's not going to be inherently enjoyable, but it's going to lead to overall performance improvement. Now the trade-off comes in here where I'm saying, okay, but you, coach, you've got to now identify what's the weakness in Brian, because Johnny is maybe going to be his buddy back for what he needs to work on in his deliberate practice profile. And if not, you've got to identify who's going to be Brian's buddy for deliberate practice. So they're the 2 ways that deliberate practice can be operationalized in team sport. 1 is that you spotlight the player within an environment. Or 2, when they're doing discrete skill stuff in a variety of ways where there's a lot of adaptability required, but you're modeling them with someone who's already effective at that. And that person is saying, well, for the betterment of this team and the betterment of their program, of course I'm going to work with John. Because I also know that Sam is going to be put with me later in the week because he's brilliant at heading the ball and I'm not great at that. Or crossing the ball, I'm going to be put with David and so on and so forth. And that's ways that we can operationalize the deliberate practice in a team environment.
I love the idea of the buddy system because it affords greater opportunity for feedback, doesn't it? Not just feedback from the coach, but feedback from teammates.
Yes.
Gets players talking to each other. I love that idea, and it also lends itself towards that notion of vicarious experience. Modeling. If somebody else can do it on our team, then I can do it. So there's that self-belief, Albert Bandura stuff.
Lovely, but also the stuff of Rich Masters around implicit learning that you'd know all about.
Yep.
Learning without really knowing why I'm learning or how I'm learning. Yep. Not putting a schema on the learning because I'm actually engaging, but all the while I'm also watching someone who's really good at it, who's a good model for me, and I'm picking up things that maybe I'm not consciously aware of, but I am somewhere. I'm aware of something because I'm actually implementing them.
Yeah.
I'm picking up postural cues, a lot of the work that Mark Williams himself would have done with Al McRoberts and so on and so forth. But that there's a dualism to the learning that's happening, and there's something implicit that's happening too, which means that the more variability I can add into that space, the less likely I'm going to have someone thinking there is a system I need to follow here. I'm always encouraging people away from systems. Framework, albeit great, lovely, but a system I think is quite mechanistic in that regard for me, especially in an open sport like football, where there's such variety, let's say, and there's so many different types of scenarios that could be presented to somebody in a 90 second period of the game, let's say,
And so, if we're working with a grassroots coach, a coach with, let's say, limited time, because your example there of deliberate practice in a team sport, it sounded like it lent towards the idea that we might take an individual away with another player, perhaps, and put on an activity just for that player, just for that individual. But as we know, that's lovely to have that luxury of time, but often we don't have that luxury of time. Would you say that deliberate practice from an individual perspective within a team sport can take place within the session itself, within an activity with, let's say, 22 players on the pitch, but perhaps we're having a discrete conversation with that player and helping them to set an appropriate deliberate practice goal that they then have to go and engage with, and perhaps we as a coach can siphon ourselves off from time to time within that activity, or we allot one coach to do that, to be able to give feedback during the activity to that one player.
Love it, absolutely. And the word, the massive word you use there, goal. As soon as we give somebody, like, and again, look, this evidence better than I do, goal setting and so on and so forth, and the importance of goal setting, the importance of that as a part of someone's process. But I think if we can direct someone's attention towards something, I think we can have a significant impact on their uptake and engagement in that environment. And it also, as you said, it allows the coach maybe to take a step back and then come in with feedback at an appropriate time. But I think if it is in that kind of a goal-directed manner, I think it's huge. I think where the problem happens sometimes in team sports is that we're very quick to think that everyone should get it at the same pace. We think that there's an optimal way that someone should, and if they don't, there's something wrong with them. And you're thinking, well, hang on, that's unlikely. Maybe there's something else at play. Maybe they're better at something that's that we're unaware of, and so on and so forth. And again, the key, and this is somewhat off topic, but maybe not so. One of the big things at the moment that I'm struggling with, with my under 10s, let's say, where my 9-year-old is, right, is this idea, oh, well, now they're at an age where we need to put them into the groups. The stronger boys with the stronger boys, and the middle boys with the middle boys, and the weaker boys with the weak. And I'm like, hang on a second, guys. Let's look at Manchester City. Even now, we all know they have an outrageous squad. Outrageous. Their bench would probably be in the top half of the Premier League, let's say, right? And yet within that team, Pep Guardiola has things to work on with players because they're not all the finished article. You look at the team below them, Liverpool, with another incredible coach in Jurgen Klopp. Are they the best players in every position in the world? No, because they all have things to work on. Yet in the children's space, we think, let's get all the best players together and then all the middle players. And you're like, no. In fact, some of the brilliant things that we've seen online over recent years is hearing stories about how senior players work with the lesser developing players, the players who are on a pathway, but they're not there yet, but they're in the environment where there are better players around them. And yet at a kiddie level, we think, let's get all the better players together because, they'll then be able to play their games and they'll all be able to. And you're like, no, your job as a coach is to keep it as mixed ability as long as you can, and then really earn your crust as a coach to ensure that there is that engagement from everyone involved, that you don't that's where the constraints come in and the rules come in and the scenarios come in, so that you're actually working. And again, going back to someone like Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan was a brilliant player before Phil Jackson came along, but without Phil Jackson saying to Michael Jordan, Michael, we can't win it with you on your own. You've got to learn how to play basketball with the other 4 guys. We know they're not as good as you. We know they never will be, but it's very easy for a team of 5 to just shut you out. You've got to know and learn how to bring the other 4 guys who are mere mortals into this team. And yes, some nights, Michael, you can go off and shoot your 50 and so on, and it'll be amazing. But you've got to learn we're not all Michael Jordan. And we all know what happened over a 7-year period. There was 6 titles and so on and so forth. That's the same thing he did when he went to the Lakers with Kobe and Shaq. And it's because it's this understanding. Yes, you're going to have superb players in every environment who seem to be someone who's better than everybody else or most everybody else. Your job as a coach then is to see how can you develop them by their engagement with others in the group, not separate them from the group and create this little super group where then all they experience is the same thing. We know that difference of environments and chaos in the environments and variability in the environment is a good thing. The last thing we want is all the best players just playing with the better people, because then they don't understand when things are going wrong, because it never goes wrong for them because they're all brilliant. And that's something that comes back into that space around deliberate practice. It doesn't need is it possible for it to be deliberate practice for everybody all at the same time? No, because some people get it and others don't. But that's where we can spotlight the deliberate practice for some people, and there's a continuum there, either in the discrete space that we mentioned or the spotlight space, or something in between there as well.
I love that, and there's some real different insights there, especially around the benefits, the advantages of mixed ability practice and training. And it's perhaps a different lens, and certainly a different lens to how I grew up, and probably how you grew up in sport, in as much as we were all categorized into certain groups. And in so many sports, I was a passionate sports person and a decent sports person. It was a mix of A's and B's groups, but I do look back and wonder if I could have profited from a wider and broader experience across abilities. Ed, I'd like to finish today with.
Do you mind if I just speak to one piece of research that's happening at the moment, just on that before we move on? And you know this guy. Mark O'Sullivan is currently a part of a methodology team, a research team in AIK Stockholm right now. And the early data the data from their first sample is now coming out. And he sent it on to me there recently. He was like, look at what we've seen, the numbers. Look at here is the result of 4-5 years of work when we took these 9-year-olds and so on and so forth. And it is incredible, Dan, what they've done up there. And again, he'd be the first to say, it's not a case of now do what we've done. No, but look at your distinct environment and apply the same principles of what we've done here. Of course, there'll be differences culturally, there'll be differences traditionally, and so on and so forth, historically, but the principles are things that are adaptable and fluid for whatever environment. They have a situation now where they have more players from their academy, from their underage system, join the club academy from within the system than they ever in the history of the club. They now have a larger waiting list than they've ever had in the club. They've had the greatest retention rates in the history of the club for the underage section. And there was one other one, I think there was 4 or 5. And he was like, it's all based around creating a form of life around these kids where they feel they are a part of something, that there's not somebody above them directing their future for them without them having any say in it, but they're actually a part of something truly organic. Like, for example, my two boys go out and play on the green outside with boys and girls from all ages, and it works because they figure it out. But then adults come in and say, no, the 7s have to go with the 7s, the 8s have to go with the 8s, the 9s. Okay, now the 8s, you're a good 8, you're not a great 8, and you're a weak 8. Now we're going to put you together. I was like, who? Like, my background, Dan, I have a degree in sports science, I have a PhD in skill acquisition, I have coaching badges from I don't know how many different sports, and I can't tell you who's going to be the great player at 9 or 10 years of age. Yet, most of the parents who run these clubs and so on and so forth, they're not even from a sports science background. They have no idea of the evidence research. They work in regular jobs like anybody else, but they seem to think that they can spot it because some kid just seems to get it a little earlier than someone else. It's truly broken, and we need to do better for the kids, not for the coaches. We need to do better for the kids, which will have an impact then on better for them as they get to the 15, 16, they begin to specialize, and better as they go into more elite environments, and better as they go into more professional environments.
It's certainly a fascinating landscape. To finish us off the last few minutes, and we can make this quite quick fire if you'd like. Team coaches, session design. What would be your skill act predominantly? Although you have many hats, what would be your prime tips for session design within the Skillac space?
Nice. Okay. Right. I think first and foremost for me, top tips for session design, let's call it, is include the players.
Okay.
Include the players. I do it with the 9-year-olds. I do it with the 13-year-olds. Guys, what do we want to work on tonight? We had a game last Sunday. Where were we struggling? Where were we strong? What do we need to? And of course, your job as a coach is to, if they come up with something absolutely harebrained, maybe go with that some night, But if they're going with something, and it's not great, you ask a different question and it'll come around. But they then feel like they've a part to play. They're co-creators with us. So that'll be the first thing. Include the players. The second thing would be to build the session around scenarios that happen in the game. So we get away from discrete drill-oriented practices. Scenarios. Put like 1v1s happen all the time in matches. 2v1s, 2v2s, 1v2s, 3v2s, 2v3s, 3v3s, Build scenarios, build the game out from what happens in the game.
Yep.
The next thing would be something, again, other stuff I'm working with, and I've done some stuff with UK Coaching University, is the peak model, my own way of coaching. I praise PEAQ. I try and encourage coaches to praise a lot, to allow space to explore, to affirm on top of their praises. So great pass is the praise. Well done for seeing the space is the affirmation. Great, Mary, great run down the line. Your fitness is paying off. Praise, great run down the line. Affirmation, your fitness is paying off. And then the final part is to engage with questions only, that cue. That peak model, to praise, to explore, to affirm, and to engage with them through questions. The next thing then around this design of the session, so that's more about the coach's delivery. The next thing I'd be saying to embrace the chaos for the coaches. It's okay if it's not working. Don't rush in, is what I say oftentimes. Let it go. Let it seed as something emerge, and so on and so forth. And that's not hands-off coaching. That's just delicate coaching, That's sensitive coaching. And then when you do go back to the peak model, go in with a question. Don't rush in with the answer, go in with the question. And finally, I suppose the one I try and do, even my own coaching, throw in a curveball. How that they don't get changed, and it's maybe different in COVID now, but they rock up and they're on a different pitch. They rock up and the balls haven't been pumped up yet. They rock up and you don't have cones. You left the cones in the car. Okay, guys, what do we do tonight? I don't have any cones. And they look at you. You forgot the cones. Yeah, so what do we do? Oh, guys, I only have one ball. So what do we do? Get them used to a world where it is not all it does not all go to plan. The education system we have right now is just built on rubrics and order and structure. Answer these 3 questions in these 2 ways, and it's I get them in first year in university, and what we have to teach them? We have to teach them how to learn, because all they've done before that is just learn it off, spit it out, and forget it a week later. So one of the things I actually do with first years sometimes, and it might be in the first year or the first semester, second semester, I'll ask them questions about things they did in school, So hands up here who did biology. Okay, let's answer this question. They're like, I don't know. I thought you did biology. But they've forgotten it already because of how they learned it. So I throw in a curveball. Get them used to a world where they're going to have to be adaptable. They're going to have to make some decisions on the fly. They have to be problem solvers. Sum that up. Include the players. Build it around scenarios. Engage with the peak model for the delivery. Embrace the chaos. And throw in a curveball.
And if people want to learn more about the peak model, if they return back to episode number 1 of the Sport Psych Show, I do believe you elaborated more on it. So awesome stuff. Ed, that was just absolutely fantastic as always. I think we covered quite a lot of of ground of different topics there, and team sports and individual sports. So I'm so grateful for your time. And to finish off, I know you would have tapped the interest of the Sport Psych Show audience. So how can people get in contact if they've got questions for you? And do let us know about your upcoming Skill Ack. I'm going to call it a festival of Skill Ack seminars and sessions and stuff. So yeah, fill us in here.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so people can contact me. I'm on Twitter every Friday. I jump on there for about an hour or so, either at the end of the day or the start of the day or something. And I'm at Dr. Skillack, DrSkillack. I'm on Twitter there. I'm on LinkedIn, I think, at Ed Coughlan. Or you can just email me, drskillack@gmail.com. That's where people can contact me. Yes, I'm also part of a really fun group myself with Phil Carney at University of Limerick, Ollie Logan at British Swimming, Alan Dunton at Technological University of Dublin. 4 of us run Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland. We've had an in-person conference in 2018. We were supposed to do it every second year, and then we had an online conference in 2020 because some strange pandemic happened. And we've since done a few webinars, and we have another webinar series coming up in 2022 with some really super people. So MSA Ireland on Twitter is where we're at, and we'll be sending things out about that. So yeah, it'll be cool. And I think, I'm sure, no doubt, Dan, well, you were at our first conference.
I watched.
And you were
good pizzas, good gin.
Yeah. So that's what's coming up, and that's where we're heading, hopefully.
Brilliant. Well, Ed, I'm so appreciative of your time as always, mate. And thank you so much, Dr. Ed Coughlan.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sport Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.